Hi,
Hiya.
I'm Evaleen. Hi. So I'm Evaleen from Ausome Ireland. This is Steph Macaulay from Infinite Diversity and also the creator of the Munster model. So we're going to be doing our stimming webinar next week together on Wednesday, the 6th of May at 7 p.m. Irish time. How are you looking forward to it now, Steph? Are you all
Um,
prepared?
this is going to be interesting. I'm going to enjoy this because I've never done this live online before. Been recorded before, done it at conferences and whatever, but never done it online before. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. But yeah, it's going to be exciting. It's going to be interesting. And
Yeah.
it's the stuff in there which has been added or changed, modified, made more subtle over the years. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how people respond to it.
Yeah, I think there's going to be even like the last time I saw you talk about stimming was in Cork 2 years ago, I'd say. So, and I know your thinking has probably changed a lot even since then, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I think in the last 6 months, especially, there's been pieces which, I mean, you kind of mentioned the Munster model. Part of what led to the development of the Munster model was my efforts kind of trying to make sense out of stimming. What's happened now is that the Munster model has kind of matured into something coherent, and that's now starting to feed back into stimming, where I'm looking at the stimming and saying, well, hang on, that actually makes more sense now. So it's a kind of a recursive development between the two. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how people respond to it now.
Yeah, because I think like what people think, because I've been kind of asking people on Twitter and stuff there for the last few days, just kind of like, what is stimming? How would you define it? And yeah, there is this kind of thinking that it's for self-stimulating, self-soothing or self-stimulating behavior, or it's for communication. People talk about the types of stimming, flapping, rocking, staring, kind of subtle things and that, but there doesn't seem to be the why behind it. Like, I suppose the deeper layers of kind of how it starts and how it develops and how good autistics are at it. Like, that's what I always say. I'm like, every human stims, but autistics are particularly good at it.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that got me excited about the idea of stimming way back now. When I first started writing about it, properly thinking hard about it, occurred to me that there's about 250 million autistics around the world. Most autistics grow up effectively in isolation from any sort of autistic community or any sort of autistic culture as such. It's something you find when you're a teen or when you're an adult, and you kind of discover each other online, usually. Goes from there. But at that stage, people have been living for years and years and have developed stimming. And there's somebody sitting there in Brazil whose stims are a direct parallel in terms of what they do and why they do it to somebody in Japan and somebody in Berlin and somebody in Ontario. And they've never met, and they may never even come into contact with each other, even online. But they do the same kinds of things in the same kinds of ways for the same reasons. So there's something really fundamental going on there. So either there's some sort of secret psychic bond between autistic people,
Maybe.
or there isn't, or this is something inherently human. This is something instinctively human. And that seems to be what's happening. It's taking something, a normal, ordinary human way of dealing with certain types of situations. And because you face them on a daily basis over and over and over again, you get good at it and you develop it and you modify it and you repurpose it for other purposes. And that's where it gets really, really interesting, because what autistics have done is take an ordinary little thing, which for most people would involve things like maybe dancing, clapping their hands, tapping a pen impatiently, pacing up and down, and turning it into a real skill, which can be used in so many different ways. Now, I mean, it's telling autistic people this, they kind of nod and go, yeah, we get this. And it really helps autistic people to kind of get that structure and the idea of that and the possibilities kind of laid out, if you like, step by step, because then they go, right, I'm now going about this consciously instead of instinctively. But there's a whole world of people out there who, because they're human, they have the possibility to look at what autistics do and say, do you know, we could use this too. You know, I wonder if
why do you think autistics have developed this? Like, what do you think it is about us that we've taken it kind of to another level? I know this probably sounds funny for people listening who think stimming is a bad thing as well, because people think we actually understand it and think that it's a bad thing. Obviously, we're not taught. We're taught with the, you know, stimming being part of who we are, how we express ourselves, how we think, how we, you know, process everything. Why is it? Why did autistics come up with all of this? Like, why do you think?
Because despite the idea that stimming is a bad thing, the funny thing about it is that if it's anything, if you want to go and put a kind of sort of measure of good or bad on it, it's a good thing. That's the funny thing about it. And I've just, like so many things when it comes to autistics, if it's described as good, then it's probably bad. And if it's described as bad, then it's probably good. It's actually a good thing because it's a survival technique. It's a strategy for coping with stressful situations. And human beings are social by nature. Autistic people are human beings, and because autistics are human beings, we're social by nature. Despite the common stereotypes. And that means that things become stressful when you feel excluded or misunderstood or unloved, or people get angry with you or shut you out of things or mistreat you or kind of misrepresent you. And that happens all the time for autistic people. I mean, there's always exceptions to this, but I mean, that's the common experience. And the way people deal with stressful situations is we externalize it. We kind of transfer it into something physical. We shout, we tap things, we pace up and down, you know. This is what humans, this is how we do it. We kind of push it out of our bodies and we move it outside and we kind of turn it into something else. It's maybe a sense that, you know, I feel frustrated. So if I'm moving, I feel like I'm being able to do something to respond to the situation, and it develops into something else. But when you're getting that on a daily basis, and even as a toddler, you know, it's something that becomes natural to you. It becomes part of your daily routine. That, like, you know, okay, I've now got stressful. I know what to do now. I can, you know, rock back and forward and at home as I'm doing it, because that makes me feel a little bit more like I'm reorganizing and actually putting some sense of structure and order and back, and it's helping me to externalize the whole thing, and it makes me calm a little bit. It gives me something to focus on. That's what it is, really. I mean, how that could be a bad thing just doesn't make sense, you know. I mean, it's like saying, well, you know, I've got a broken leg, putting a cast on it is a bad thing. That's it's like that, you know what I mean? Like, you know, I've got a headache. Well, I'll take 2 paracetamol. You know, paracetamol are not bad because they're associated with headaches. They're good because they deal with headaches. It's that kind of, you've got to shift your whole view of things like that. When you do, you start to think, well, if it's a good thing, what's good about it? How does it work? What situations cause it to arise? And are there other situations where we could take that kind of thing and maybe apply it where people aren't coping with the situation well, you know? And I remember going back 10 years, 8 years, having discussions about, can you teach stimming to somebody, you know, to other autistic people? Could you take an autistic child and teach them good stims for good things? And that's questions always stuck in my head. And as time has gone on, the more and more you think about it, the more you think, yeah, you really can. You really, really can. There's no reason why not. I mean, it's just a skill, you know. It's like learning to drive, it's learning to write, it's learning to tap dance or play hurling, you know. It's just a set of skills. And if you practice it, you get good at it.
I think, though, that's probably one of the big differences kind of the way we were discussing or stimming at the webinar is because we see it as a skill or an art, not a terrible sign of autism or something weird that an autistic child does when they're overwhelmed, because that's not always the case either. Like if a child is happy, they'll flap their hands. Like I ask that question regularly. I'm like, what does this mean? And I could have, 25 or 30 people in a room who are parents, teachers, SNAs, whatever. And most of the time they don't know. Maybe one person would know that it means happy or excited. And I think then the danger is, because of course I did there before the lockdown, there was two fabulous SNAs, and they kind of, I was talking more with this, and they were like, oh, they just kind of realized how then they were acting on this misinformation, because if a child started flapping in the class, they were then coming over with like the lap pads and the weighted blankets, because they were kind of told that that's a sign that someone's trying to regulate, or that they're distressed, and that the weighted blanket would actually regulate them. But really, it's just an autistic child having a great time, going, this is so exciting, I'm loving it. And then suddenly you have two adults coming over putting weighted blankets on you, so and I think people need to really understand like why we stim, the purposes behind it, the function, what we're doing, because that's just going to create more confusion in a child's mind, where they're going, I'm happy, and next thing they're getting like covered in blankets. It's lovely when you're anxious, but not when you don't need them when you're excited.
Yeah, exactly. It may be like watching a cartoon and you're really enjoying it and stuff, and because you're enjoying it, somebody comes over and hands you a football and a party hat, and you're like, I'm watching a cartoon, like, just leave me alone here. Yeah, but you need things. No, I don't. Leave me alone. That's one of those. It's actually a case of, do you know what? I'm having a great time. Leave me the hell alone here. Just let me do it. And in a classroom, in the classroom is, if a kid's doing that in the classroom, it means that they're focused. It means that they're enjoying it. They're connected to the subject. This is actually a really good sign. It's one of those rare. Imagine being a teacher standing at the top of a classroom and being able to look around the room and, oh, look, David's over there. He's totally focused on this. He's enjoying it and he's taking it all in. It's like a sign. I mean, how many other kids in the class can you actually just look at them immediately and just, I know that they're following everything that's going on, And when if you kind of take that, you're looking at it and thinking, do you know what? This is actually making my job easier. It's not making your heart, not creating extra work for you. It's actually saying, this kid's doing great. Leave him be,
See, that's if an autistic person explains that's what we're doing. But see, unfortunately, people don't listen to autistics, and it's someone else decided this is what they're doing. And for me, it seems like stimming has got totally mixed up with this idea of sensory. I actually don't even like the word sensory anymore. I think it has lost all meaning. People don't even have an understanding themselves, I think, of what it means. But it's kind of like, for me, even like the idea that a child is playing with the light, and they're, they could be looking at the pattern. They could actually be learning from it if they're moving their fingers, if there's light coming in the window, watching it on the floor. It could actually be their way of learning or studying this thing. But then someone comes along and they're like, oh, that's their weird sensory system. They're looking for sensory input. They need this kind of this input right now, and that's something to do with our senses. And actually, no, that's not what's happening at all. And again, this kind of idea of sensory seeking, when actually we're learning from something, or actually maybe just enjoying looking at something, but they kind of forget that actually we could just really, like, I got some of my little stimmy things out for the webinar, but like that, if that's really cool to watch. I'm not craving sensory input, same as if we like look at waterfalls, we like look at fires, like these are just human things that we all enjoy looking at. But autistics are looking for visual input if we're just looking at something, so it's kind of got, I just think it's got a bit ridiculous. And I think, unfortunately, then, because of that, people are kind of responding to autistic kids and adults with the wrong things, which is kind of adding to their confusion then.
I think one of the problems, and it's not a difficult one to fix, is that somebody goes off and reads something or goes to a talk and picks up 3 or 4 words from it and kind of thinks, okay, STEM, sensory, regulation, communication. I've got some words, and I kind of plug them together, and there's this general fuzzy sense
Yeah.
Like they're not connected necessarily. Not only that, but they're not even connected in the way you think they're connected. And the worst part of it is that people go off then and implement this as policies, you know, and nowhere along the line does anyone actually stop and go and say, do you know, we should actually ask an autistic person if this is making sense.
Yeah.
You know,
That's what I love to do. I love like taking people's ideas, and I love to and seeing what you know. Sorry, someone's come into the room. Sorry. I'm recording. Apologies. Okay, no worries. We'll just keep going. I thought the hand signal of. Anyway, not to worry.
One of the
yeah.
one of the perfect examples of the kind of sensory / stimming thing is the sensory room, which has become more and more of a hobby horse for more and more autistic people as more and more places create sensory rooms, and they're full of bright colors, hard surfaces for some inexplicable reason I still haven't understood, bright lights, twirly things, clacky things, noisy things, buttons that buzz, and you know, okay, yeah, these are all things you can do, and it has a sensory thing, but like, you know, that's not going to help. And it's not going to help because actually, first of all, the person actually knows what they want anyway. They know usually what it is that's going to help them. So just giving them some random pile of stuff isn't necessarily going to meet their needs. Secondly, part of the whole thing is about focusing on a thing, you know, and a single process, a single action, a single sensation, and being surrounded by 50 bloody, ridiculous, sparkly, glittery, you know, like, how are you supposed to focus on one thing? I mean, it's like saying, you know, I'm going to go and listen to this interesting discussion on the radio in a room with 7 other radios on playing other things. Like, no, give me a chance here. But the saddest part of it is that people spend an awful lot of money. I mean, you know, we're talking about hospitals, we're talking about schools,
airports,
and things.
Yeah.
They don't owe them money, and they go on. They've got a precious little bit of budget. Let's blow it all buying all of these stuff. When actually, do you know what the kids really need? Just give them a quiet room with low lights. You can actually reduce the electricity cost. Soft things to sit on, right? And allow them to bring their thing in and leave them to it for a while. They'll get on with it just fine. Half the time people stim, they don't even use, you know, these stim toys and stuff. Half the time people don't even have toys or stim tools. You know, they...
Well, no, I mean, I use I stim my rings a lot.
Because it can remind me of like a hummingbird, is just doing that. And it's the pressure in here, which is, that's just really nice. I've only ever seen 2 other people do this. But when you ask anyone about it, they go, "Oh, it's lovely the way the pressure." And you,
I was doing.
I don't need a twiddly thing or some sparkly thing.
The other night I was watching TV and my little girl was like, "Mom, how can you move those toes so far apart?" And I looked down and I was like, "I don't know." And I was able to use. And then I was like, so I had. And then when I tried to consciously do it, I couldn't do it because I was trying. And I think it's the same thing that you're talking about with your hands. I was doing it with my toes, and it just felt like, and I was just doing it like totally didn't even realize I was doing it. But yeah, I couldn't do it then if I tried to concentrate. It was weird. Yeah.
But that's the thing about it is it's. I think one of the other things about stimming is people talk about it saying, "Oh, I mean, you know yourself. I mean, you've seen me talk about this." Kind of defining different types of stims as being for de-stressing or kind of like regulating sort of emotional sort of like intensity, other kinds of stims which are useful for actually taking the techniques of stimming and deliberately using them as kind of as an upper almost, basically to sort of enhance a good mood and sort of like make you feel even better than you might be. But other times for things like focus. So when you're trying to think and concentrate on something, help me to regulate internally, regulate your thoughts and stuff like that. But there's people, and this is something I've kind of been thinking about, even just in the last week, is there's so many situations where people will use one stim in two different ways at the same time, or two or three stims in parallel. So, it's like I'm doing this because it's flushing something that anxiety out of my system, but I'm also doing something else, which is boosting my good feelings. Almost while I'm doing something else internally in my head, I'm kind of doing a kind of a tick-tack, 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 tick in my head movement, kind of a silently behind all of that, maybe in time to what something else I'm doing, which is actually organizing my thoughts and helping me to settle thoughts and think about something, because that's something important I need to kind of like settle in my head. And you're doing them in parallel, and it's not necessarily unusual. I mean, how many times have people sat down and watched the movie, supposedly watching the movie, while reading stuff on their phone and paying attention to their kid playing on the floor? I mean, we can do this. It's called multitasking, and it's actually possible. You can do multitasking stims as well, and the possibilities here are bloody incredible. It's an untapped human, natural, instinctive resource, and that, for me, in some ways, is the most exciting part of it. It's relatively easy to go to autistic people and say, hey, this is what's happening when you do something. This is what's happening. It's a completely different thing to go to non-autistic people and say, you have the capability for this. We can show you how to use this to deal with stage fright and organizing yourself for exams or a job interview. We can help you organize yourself while you're giving a presentation in a work environment. We can help you use it while doing a driving test or focusing on something, in just a conversation. These are all.
One of the examples I use is that, like, when I was in secondary school, like teenager, sure, I didn't know what I was doing, but I used to be doodling, like drawing on my books. And obviously then teachers would be like, Evaleen, stop drawing on your books, concentrate, which was like the opposite. So, if I stopped drawing, then I stopped taking it in. But it wasn't even that this movement was for to concentrate. It was more that actually by physically doing this movement, it was like I was taking in the information hourly and then kind of converting it to pictures in my head. So then that is basically kind of how it was, nearly like this action helped me to translate that information into my own language. So that then I learned it there and then, because I think I used to annoy a lot of my teachers because I seemed to just absorb information. And I think that's what I was doing. I was literally learning it there and then. So I didn't have to kind of do a lot of study when I went home, and that kind of stuff. So it was like a faster way of learning it, of just translating it. Because I think that's what we do anyway. We're just kind of translating someone else's thoughts into things that we understand. That's kind of how what learning is. That's how I understand it. But
yeah. Well, I've got a Conlon's metronome, which is my little story about teachers using stimming techniques in a classroom to help students study, which I'm not going to go into now. I'll go into that when we're talking on the 6th. But it's a perfect example of somebody actually using stimming techniques at the head of a classroom in a way that's projected across the whole room and actually helps everyone in the room. Nobody in that room was conscious of what was being done or how it was working. And it's only years later I came to understand how it was so bloody effective. It's extraordinary.
But with younger kids, like we teach rhymes, and like I know even just from teaching drama, if you teach an action song or a poem that has actions, they'll learn it like that as opposed to just words. Like, so physically moving your body, just really like how that's connected with learning and muscle memory, like just hasn't been kind of explored at all, has it? And I think
they talk about kind of, you know, kinetic learners and visual learners. And everyone's an everything learner. Everyone's a little bit more this way or a little bit more that way. Maybe just because the way they're made. Maybe just because they've got more practice learning this way or that way. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't mean that everybody can't gain from it, you know. So yeah, why not just use that? We all know things like the educational system is antiquated in its approach. You know, let's get a bunch of 7-year-olds, stick them in a room, put them in rows in benches, get them to sit with their hands on their laps and face forward, and the teacher will dictate stuff to them and they'll recite it back, and that's learning. But we know that that's not how learning works, you know.
No.
Not really. So let's make it better. You know, we can. We actually know how. And in a sense, what autistic people have got, it's incredible potential for everyone. It almost seems criminal to essentially deliberately push it aside and say, no, well, that might work, but we're not going to do it.
Yeah. Like, first we have to get over people thinking it's a bad thing or a weird thing, and actually it's a really useful, clever thing that we're doing, yes, that we would love to share and kind of educate other people on. So yeah, we kind of have to get through all of those barriers first, I think. But
we can call it sort of like neural enhancement techniques and emotional regulation process skill thing, whatever. We'll come up with some.
Sounds like a plan. Brilliant. So you know, but I don't want to say much more because we don't want to ruin obviously what we're going to talk about more on the webinar, but just to give people an idea, I suppose this is what we're looking at, that stimming is a skill, is a really cool thing that actually has so many different functions and is integrated in our way of functioning and thinking and learning and communicating, as well as soothing and stimulating and all that kind of stuff and our emotions. But it just, I think the webinar, I'd love to do kind of like get feedback from the people, you know, kind of maybe just do something else later on it again, just kind of see where people's understanding is at, because yeah, as you say, stimming classes for everybody is kind of where where we should be heading.
And I think one of the things that would be great as a follow-up, just me kind of sales pitching to myself as much as anything else, will be to do one purely focused on kind of almost like, you call it like virtual stims, non-physical stims, non-visible stims, stuff that you do inside the virtual world in your head, specifically for the whole business of processing stuff, decision making, and sort of analyzing and critiquing information, because I think that's a whole side of stimming that's got giant potential, that nobody's really looked at all.
No, you know, but the more we talk about stimming, and the more I feel that like people who've maybe been labeled with intellectual disabilities as well, who stim a lot, we don't know how other people are learning. We actually don't know. We've never explored that. Someone decided they're not learning or they can't learn, but they can actually be interacting with their world in a totally different way that we don't understand, and learning and communicating with their environment in a totally different way. And I think we'll probably learn way more about that in the next decade or two, I think, because it's the same with autistics. Now we kind of know more than we did 10 years ago. And I think there's going to be a lot of more understanding around how people we think are intellectually disabled actually are having a totally different conversation with their world, with our world, or interacting with it in a different way. That's just, I think, something we need to explore as well.
There's been such a history of that going back, whether it's deaf kids, whether it's kids with physical disabilities, blind kids, you know, people with Down syndrome, autistic people, obviously, and you know, the list goes on and on and on. All of these people who kind of are obviously doing something different, So obviously they're not doing it the way everyone else does it. So that means they're obviously not able to do it the way everyone else does it. But that's the only way to do it. So obviously they're stupid,
Yeah.
and pushed off into a home or the back bedroom, and they're an embarrassment, and they don't get education, they don't get opportunities, they don't get the possibilities presented to them. And most of all, they never get asked, ever.
Yeah.
Never get asked, what's this for? How's it work? What are you experiencing? What do you know?
Yeah.
And how many times have we had situations where people have come along, and I mean, this is a famous example of a certain Canadian woman who was apparently unable to communicate and intellectually disabled, so on and so on and so on. And she was sick, and in sheer frustration that nobody was catching on to her urgent need for medical care, got up, walked over to a computer and typed out the words on the damn thing. And everyone just sat there with their mouths open, like, what, how, when did she learn? She taught herself without anyone even, and it was only because the need was there. She was forced to go and use this information that she had anyway. And then it turns out afterwards she's this extraordinary, complex, and very, very rich world that was just, it wasn't that it was locked inside. It was just that nobody ever bloody well gave her the opportunity to let it out. It was,
Yeah.
it was, if you like, walled in, not held in by her. That's thousands of stories like that out there. We just need to release all of that by remembering that human beings are human beings, and it doesn't matter what you look like, how you act, how you appear to others. You still got feelings, you still got intellect, you still got needs, you still got desires and interests and an imagination. And it's our job on the outside, in a sense, to try and figure out how to find the right channel for them to be everything they can be,
Yeah.
And I think in some ways stimming is one of those channels,
Absolutely.
And it's a criminal thing to try and stop people. And now we know we need to make sure we don't do that anymore.
Yeah, unfortunately it's still happening, and even in very subtle ways. I suppose not obviously terrible things like ABA where kids are forced to stop, because again they don't understand what stimming actually is. So I don't know how you can analyze a behavior if you actually don't even understand it in the first place. So obviously besides that, even just the subtle things, because I know when I talk to parents, they're like, oh yeah, I do actually kind of, that look, or that kind of, if a kid does something in public, because we're all so, this is the worst society we're in, we're all afraid to do anything out of line, but who gets to decide that? I don't know. So I think
quiet now. We're going into the shops now, Casey. Be good. No words like "be good," which means kind of like, don't go don't go running off, don't go sort of like kind of doing this, that, and the other. But the kid knows really what it means is, don't shriek unexpectedly, don't go banging on the side of the trolley, don't go walking off and stuff. It's just those signals,
Yeah, but you know what? I actually use this example a lot as well, because those quiet hands, that's terrible.
Yeah.
That originated in ABA, but now a lot of schools with units or schools with autistic kids are using quiet hands visual signs as, but it doesn't mean no flapping or whatever. It means like, don't hit somebody else.
Yeah.
But we're literal interpreters. So if we see a sign saying quiet hands, it means quiet hands. So it doesn't matter what that the teachers put it up there so they wouldn't be hitting somebody else. It's what any child is going to interpret that as, my hands can't move. So again, we really need to, I think, kind of, people just need to really educate themselves, because even we're stopping stimming and stuff without even kind of realizing we're doing it a lot of the time. It doesn't have to be like a forceful thing that's implemented where you're stopping someone physically from stimming. It's kind of just ingrained in our thinking, or some people's thinking that just, I suppose, again, it's not understood properly, you know. But yeah,
That's
so listen, I'm really looking forward to our webinar. We're going to, like, I'm sure we can offer another 3 hours about stimming. But I'm really looking forward to the webinar. So again, it's on next Wednesday at 7 p.m. Irish time. That's GMT +1. So it's on at 7 p.m. The tickets, if you we actually are almost sold out. It's brilliant. It's flying because it's obviously our first time doing a webinar as well. So fingers crossed it'll all go okay. But yeah, tickets available on confidentkids.ie. I'll put the link next to the video. Maqqi, lovely talking to you, and I'll see you Wednesday.